talking about the paleo diet and autoimmune paleo diet. So I'm sure everybody's heard of the paleo diet by now. And it's a very popular one, and it's still around for a good reason because it's very versatile and easy to follow. So the paleo diet's really simple, and it's just the basic paleo diet. There's different versions of it, like primal versus paleo. But the paleo diet is basically a diet that eliminates, at its basic form, a diet that eliminates all grains, all legumes such as beans and lentils and chickpeas and things like that, and all dairy products, so anything that's made from milk, cow's milk, goat's milk, so all milk, cheese, yogurt. And I think it's very popular for weight loss, and specifically because by nature it is almost a low-carb diet. And I say almost because depending on how you tailor it, it can have a normal amount of carbohydrates compared to a standard diet. But it really, by nature of removing the grains, you tend to have a much lower carbohydrate ratio. And that works very well for some people. When medically speaking, the reason people would consider a paleo diet would be, well, one, if they're dealing with weight that they're trying to lose, if they have high blood sugar, so if they have history of diabetes or history of personally having high blood sugars, if they've tried to lose weight using other diets and were unsuccessful, and if they have any kind of inflammatory or autoimmune conditions. So anything like autoimmune hypothyroidism, like Hashimoto's disease, or any of the other autoimmune diseases, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, and so on. And the difference between the paleo and the autoimmune paleo, which I'm going to talk about next, is autoimmune paleo really removes a lot more things and adds in things. So the paleo diet is very versatile in the sense that you can tailor it to what your particular needs are. So, for example, if you feel like you don't do good on a low-carb diet, you can eat more things like more starchy vegetables. So you can have things like sweet potatoes and turnips, and depending on what version you're following, most paleo diets do remove white potatoes, but they do allow things like sweet potatoes, plantains, and other types of starchy roots. So there's plenty of room for carbohydrates there. The reasoning behind paleo diet, and the reason it's called paleo is it refers to the Paleolithic era, so our caveman ancestors. So we know that we're never going to eat the same way our caveman ancestors ate. I mean, they probably didn't eat for days. They probably ate very little meat compared to our modern version of the paleo diet. And they probably ate a lot more of the whatever was growing, local roots, berries, very seasonal. So to keep it to a true paleo diet, you actually would eat a lot more seasonally. Whatever is in season, you would eat more of the things that grow locally and grow in your area. If we were trying to mimic that here, we would do something like, we'd be eating the mesquite pods, or we'd be eating, roots or various things that actually grow here. But we're not saying that we're actually eating like our caveman ancestors. We're saying that we want to get as close as we can to it, because despite the fact that life expectancy wasn't good because of your dying from various illnesses, if you got toothache and an abscess, you could actually die from that. But health itself, in terms of nutritionally speaking, was very good. And you could get an infection and die, or you could get killed by a wild animal and die. But if you survived birth, and you survived, not getting killed by some accident or infection, and you see this in indigenous people around the world here too, that still stick to their native diets, those people are generally very healthy. And so there's a conception, and this is where the people that are proponents of the Mediterranean diet, and they kind of clash with the idea behind the paleo diet. They say, well, there's a lot more saturated fat, and there's a lot more animal products, and animal products are bad for us, and vegetarians live longer, and so on. But the reality of, if you want to follow a paleo diet, the best way to do it is to do mostly organic meats, or all organic meats, because the fatty acid profile when you're choosing organic meats is quite different. So when you eat organic grass-fed, grass-finished beef, it's a lot more similar to eating fish than it is to actually eating feedlot raised beef. So in that sense, a lot less inflammatory. You're getting a lot more of the omega-3s. You're getting less of the omega-6s and 9s. And so people that want to follow a paleo diet generally speaking, what I see on labs is that I see cholesterol comes down, triglycerides come down, and all of these, even though they're eating a lot more animal products. But really, when you think about paleo, you have to think that it's more of a vegan diet with meat. And if you think of it that way, without the beans and the grains. So if you think of it that way, the way your plate looks when you're eating paleo is at least half of your plate is vegetables, and then probably a quarter of your plate is meat, chicken, or fish, and then the other quarter would be your starchy vegetables. So your green leafies and your broccoli and cauliflower and things like that would be the majority of your diet. And the biggest challenge I think people have with a general paleo diet is, what do I eat for breakfast? Because by definition, we're not eating grains, and so all the breakfast foods kind of go out the window. So on paleo diet, you can have your breakfast meats. On most versions, you can also have eggs, and you can have vegetables. So I tell people, instead of doing your bread or whatever, there are some paleo versions of breads too, where they use nuts and eggs to make a sliceable bread that can be really delicious. Although some people have to modify this and take out the eggs if they're sensitive to eggs and things like that. The reason that this can be really good for people that have a lot of digestive problems and inflammation is, first of all, taking out grains eliminates a lot of the simple sugars and starches, so that you're not feeding those bad bacteria that we were just talking about, you're not feeding the yeast. And the other thing is, there's something called a lectin. Lectins are proteins that are found in grains and seeds that coat the surface and that are very hard to digest unless the grain is processed. So if you think about things that are actually grown on farms that came around with the advent of agriculture, all of those things actually have to be heavily processed before we can eat it. We can't just pick up wheat and eat it. It has to be heavily processed. And even if we eat the wheat berries, they have to go through a soaking and a kind of a sprouting process. So in that sense, what that sprouting is doing, like Dr. Ward was talking about, it inactivates these enzymes or these protective things on the outside of the grain, and it actually allows us to be able to digest it more. Things like nuts and seeds have a slightly toxic layer on them, and it is meant to actually protect the plant from digestion and so it would be able to go through our digestive tract, or the animal's digestive tract, and come out the other end and still be able to sprout after it comes out the other end. So in general, when we're talking about nuts and seeds, which is not allowed on the autoimmune paleo diet, there are ways to inactivate those compounds, such as soaking. So soaking for 24 to 48 or even longer until they start to sprout and inactivate those things. And then the legumes, same thing. Beans are wonderful for us, but in some people, it creates more inflammation because they stay in the digestion a lot longer. They're high in carbs, so they tend to feed the bad bacteria, and it can take a while for grains to actually be to process, especially whole grains. So with some people with digestive deficiencies, like they're not making enough digestive enzymes, grains and whole grains can actually slow them down and weigh them down and make them more tired. So to recap, paleo diet is basically no grains, no dairy, and no beans at its very basic level. And I wanted to share my personal story because some people in here have seen my transformation. I went on a paleo diet about 2 years ago, and I lost 45 pounds without trying, without avoiding sugar, without really making any other changes. And then a few months ago, I went to the autoimmune paleo version, which I kind of go to off and on, but not 100%. But that made a big difference in my energy levels. And before that, I couldn't lose weight. So I was having a very hard time losing weight. I did HCG diet a few times, and half the weight came back. So when I got off of all the grains, I came to a point where I realized every time I eat any grains, I gain about 4 pounds of water weight overnight. The spare tire appears around my stomach, and that was good enough for me to say I don't really need them in my life anymore. So, to transition into any questions about what we just talked about? So to transition into the autoimmune paleo diet, my specialty in this practice is autoimmune disease and chronic illness. And so I brought a couple books which I'm going to pass out at the end, but over the last 2 to 3 years, this way of eating has been a lot more popular. And the difference with the autoimmune paleo is it takes out even more things that can be inflammatory. But it also adds in a lot of things that are optimal nutrition. So you have to think of your digestive process as this is the way we feed our bodies. So if you're taking in anything that's not going to give you nutrition back or that's going to cause inflammation, then you're really putting yourself at a disadvantage nutritionally speaking. So for example, if you eat, let's say pizza, since that was my favorite food before. But say if you eat pizza and it's got the gluten that you're sensitive to and it's got the dairy that you're sensitive to, if you're eating something that costs you energy to digest but you're not getting any nutrition back, that's actually a food that is giving you negative nutrition. So it's actually taking from you. And that's why some of those foods can actually make you more tired. So the autoimmune paleo diet removes also, in addition to those things that the paleo diet removes, it also removes nightshade vegetables, which are tomatoes and potatoes and peppers and eggplant, because they are very highly implicated in things like pain and inflammation. And it also removes anything made from nuts or seeds, so nuts, seeds, and seed-based spices. It also emphasizes heavily green leafy vegetables, offal, which is organ meats, and because this is more closely related to how people used to eat even at the turn of the century, where organ meats were part of eating the whole animal, and so nothing ever got wasted, and now we just eat the muscle meat. So the organ meats really have a lot of vitamins in them, the vitamin D, the vitamin A, and carotenoids and things like that come from organ meat. So one of the reasons I think that a lot of us are deficient in some of these fat-soluble vitamins is we don't eat our liver, we don't eat kidneys, we don't eat those type of things. Heart, for example, has a lot of CoQ10 in it, and carnitine, and then the connective parts, the gristle and all of that, those type of things have cartilage and connective tissue that can help actually support our connective tissue. And the other thing that it really, there's a lot of different versions of the autoimmune paleo diet, and it's very customizable according to what your particular condition is. But another version also adds a lot of seaweed too, so sea vegetables and fermented vegetables, or fermented foods, providing that you're not dealing with problems with yeast. So fermented foods also give us a lot of B vitamins and nutrients. They help boost the good bacteria in our digestion, and the whole point about the autoimmune paleo diet is to really provide you all the nutrition you need to get healthy from a really severe illness. So the people that might want to consider doing the autoimmune paleo version is if you've tried paleo and you didn't have the full benefit that you wanted to get from it. For example, you're not feeling 100% back to your energy levels, or you're still having brain fog, or you're still having trouble losing weight. If you have an autoimmune disease or a chronic infection, so I use this diet a lot with people that have Lyme disease and those type of infections because they tend to have all the same problems that autoimmune disease people have. And if you have a leaky gut, so it is designed to help rebuild your digestive tract and to help repair it, and if you have low energy. So one of the things, and some versions of the autoimmune paleo diet is eating only twice a day. And it's amazing how much less you can eat and still have more energy when you actually eat food that gives your body nutrition and that is targeted. So, when you eat things like organ meats, or you eat things like green leafy vegetables 3 times a day, or two or three times a day. The other thing about this diet is it's also a lot higher in fat, because it removes a lot of carbohydrates. So some versions of this are actually ketogenic, meaning it causes you to have ketones in your bloodstream, which are byproducts of burning fat for energy rather than carbohydrates. So any other questions? Any questions about this?
It isn't that specifically, but I've noticed the last few years I've become really sensitive to sodium. Like I'll eat something with sodium and I'll gain 4 pounds. And I drink a lot of water.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Have you switched to sea salt?
I do take Himalayan
Or
salt.
in your regular diet, have you pretty much eliminated sources of sodium?
Yeah, at home, if I go out,
Yeah.
it's sometimes hard.
I see that in people that actually eliminate table salt or sodium chloride from their diet. They tend to show a lot more sensitivity because that kind of salt is actually very toxic. than regular table salt. And in the autoimmune paleo diet, we actually encourage people to use Himalayan and Celtic salt only and not to eat any foods that are processed with regular salt. So
Okay.
it is, because Celtic and Himalayan salt are really, they provide a full spectrum of minerals. So they don't just have sodium and chloride, which are all vital to our health too. We do need salt for our health, and that's a big thing that I see in Arizona is a lot of people are mineral deficient and sodium deficient if they're not having any salt. So
And
if
I
you
actually-
completely eliminate salt from your diet, you have problems too.
Okay, and actually, I'm high in sodium on my blood work, which is weird.
And there may be some other reasons that that's happening metabolically besides just your intake. So there may be something else going on there.
What's your feelings on soy? Soy good or bad?
And most of these, well, in these diets in particular, soy is not allowed because it can be inflammatory, it's hard to digest. In general, most of us in the naturopathic world say only use soy if it's fermented. So if it's processed in a way that's used in traditional foods in places like Japan, where they've used it as part of their traditional diet for a long time, that's a little different because most of the toxins are processed and fermented by the fermenting process. But it is a very hormonally active food, meaning it acts like estrogen in our body. So if you're having trouble with hormone regulation, or if you have, family history of breast cancer and things like that, you may want to rethink the soy.